Yeah, these are all things that I think people just are not aware of, at least not many out there. I mean, how many times have you heard, yeah, there's failing crops, but I don't eat corn and soybeans. People just don't realize how connected those monocrops are to the food system overall. And yeah, there's been a lot of losses in just about every space: wheat, corn, soybeans, tons and tons of fruit orchards just are not there anymore.
Apple recently released a long-awaited privacy feature that prevents you from being tracked across websites. Facebook relied on tracking more than any other business. So it's no surprise they're trying to change this. Apple users now have the ability to choose whether or not they want to be tracked. Opting out will prevent their data from being used for ultra-targeted ads, such as age, location, health information, and your browsing history. While this is a step in the right direction, this new feature won't completely protect you online. To do that, you'll need a VPN. You can head over to virtualshield.com, and in the download tab, I'm going to choose Firefox. And click Install Now to add the Virtual Shield add-on. It's just that easy. And get started with your free 30-day trial. Install it, click Connect. You'll see the shield turn from red to green. And you'll see how from my initial service provider, I was able to even change my IP. Virtual Shield Network protected. Try Virtual Shield risk-free for 30 days and another 30-day money-back guarantee by visiting virtualshield.com/adapt2030 and get 30% off for life by taking advantage of this custom deal. That link's in the description box below. And now on with the video. And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Special guest, Kevin Snow. A lot of the things I talk about, crop losses here, economic reductions over there, but today it's going to be more about what we can do about it. So we're going to talk about Harvest Eating, and Chef Keith Snow has the Harvest Eating YouTube channel. Also, if you go back and look at some of the prior videos there, had a television series of Harvest Eating, and then also right over on harvesteating.com. Today's talk is going to be all about how to store foods for a longer amount of time, because right now things are bountiful in the harvest. If you go to farmers co-ops, you're going to find every bin's full. Bulk buying, I buy from the Amish down the road over here, and they had 5 ears of corn for $15, sweet corn. They had 15 pounds of green beans for $15, but that's in a bulk. So wherever you go right now is the best time to buy foods. And then think about the seasonality of the foods. It's going to switch over to fruits later on, from the present fruits that we have with apricots and different types of summer berries, which we need to store those up. But then we're going to switch over to the apples, the pumpkins, and you can get that full year round. So probably, I'm going to say 6 months of the year, you don't have access to, very fresh foods. So you're going to have to store that. And I am trying to learn the best I can here. I'm happy Keith is joining me because I am here to learn. And I'm really hoping that today's talk is going to give you some very solid information that you can share with your friends, your families, help you save money, help you have a healthier, diet moving through. I know canned foods have a lot of sodium, and I store food as well, but I like to mix fresh in when I have a chance. And this is what it's all about today. Storing the foods, being able to take what you have in different ways, fashions, and forms, glass jars, vacuum sealed. I don't know. These are some of the easy ones that I can ping on. Dehydrating, but there's a plethora of others which Keith is going to share with us today. So Keith, Chef Keith Snow, I do appreciate you joining me today, and thanks so much for spending your time. We had a really good conversation yesterday about what we see moving into the future, food pricing, and we can get into some of that with supermarkets stockpiling for shortages. We want to be able to store our own, grow our own, trade our own with others. So Keith, welcome. Floor is yours.
We have to get away from monocrops in this country and in our gardens. There is a lot of information out there that it's permaculture based, companion planting. So, for instance, if you have tomatoes, you're going to get a lot of pests that want to eat the tomatoes. You know darn well there in Tennessee, if you plant squash, it's going to look wonderful until the squash show up, and then you're going to get squash bugs and stink bugs, and they are horrible. So in order to combat that, you have to use different plants. So around tomatoes, you can plant carrots, you can plant garlic bulbs. So you just have to have a lot of diversity in the garden. And sometimes there's pests, whether they be flying pests or ground-based things like squirrels or rabbits. You have to just know that they're part of the ecosystem and plan on putting things in the ground that they can eat. And a lot of times, just by doing the right companion planting, and if you've got rabbits that eat stuff or deer, you can plant crops that they like. And yeah, they'll eat some of that, but in the end, you'll wind up with a harvest without dousing it with dangerous chemicals, because the chemical system you're going to see, and I know you're seeing it, I don't think the public is aware yet, but this monocrop thing that we've been doing for decades, it's ending badly. It's terrible for the crops. It doesn't infiltrate rain. The soil's blowing away at record levels. When you look at people like Gabe Brown and others that are using regenerative methods, they are actually making a profit, and they're planting as many as 17 different types of seeds at a time into their fields using a drill seeder. They never till the soil, and they're able to infiltrate 10 times the water that their neighboring farmers can infiltrate, because it just runs off, because there's no structure to the soil, because it's tilled all the time, and they put all these pest applications, and they're growing one type of crop, usually corn and soybeans. This is not going to end well for the country. So the quicker we as individuals learn to use some of these regenerative methods to build the soil, to deal with the pests naturally, and to create ecosystems, like you have different crops, you're building the soil, you've got bees there for pollination. There's a lot of things that you can plant that attract pollinators naturally as well. All those things need to be a part of what you're trying to do to free yourself from what I feel is a quickly failing food system.
Yeah, until the curveball in of cooling and shorter growing seasons, shrunken growing seasons because of this grand solar minimum onset and intensification. So a lot of the traditional crops that took us, almost 200 years to figure out where the perfect grow zone for those are, wired in and dialed in the plant and harvest by dates pretty much over the last 100 years. Well, that's all changed, ED, and it's continuing to change as we go every single year forward. So the wipeout of almost all the wheat crop in the United States this year, at least half the corn's gone. Brazil lost 50% of its production. Argentina's halting exports of corn and beef. And you look at Australia, they were starting to export, but then the mouse plague, and they lost so much crop because of one of the largest mouse plagues they've had since the mid 1800s. So it just starts to add in, and then the massive, gigantic floods yet again in China, in the same areas that didn't recover from last year's floods in the growing areas. So as we look forward, you're still going to have the same appetite, if you will, for food, calories, tonnage. But where's it going to come from if it's not being grown at the moment? I understand we have some carryover stocks, but how trustworthy do you think the USDA numbers are? Because their mission charter is to stabilize agricultural markets. It's not there to give you the truth. So you got to think about USDA numbers. How truthful are they versus what's really in the, well, they could say there's a huge amount in the silos and the carryover stocks and storage, but how much of that's good? Because I talked to a grain trader who minimum buy, if you're going to, they do delivery on rail. So their minimum order is 12,500 tons before they'll even talk to you and think about getting some carriage arranged for you. They were saying that the amount of corn, of just the black corn, black kernels, and just the craziest degraded quality you've ever seen is getting mixed in with good for export, because farmers are realizing they can empty out their bins, and the old stuff at the back of the bin that wouldn't make it through an American survey as quality for sale, not even at animal feed levels, can get tossed in. And as long as there's only a certain number of kernels in the ratio there, they can still export that overseas. So when I'm starting to hear these kind of things straight off the ground of people who move grain in large quantities, I'm thinking, what's really going on, and how much grain is there truly out there? if they're dusting out the old bins where they're throwing black kernel inside there.
Yeah, these are all things that I think people just are not aware of, at least not many out there. I mean, how many times have you heard, yeah, there's failing crops, but I don't eat corn and soybeans. People just don't realize how connected those monocrops are to the food system overall. And yeah, there's been a lot of losses in just about every space: wheat, corn, soybeans, tons and tons of fruit orchards just are not there anymore. Just the other day, like I mentioned, I came through a major peach area last year. They lost 85% of all the fruit there. And that was because of a really late cold frost or a hard freeze. And I asked the farmer, he's been there for 30 years. He's never seen anything like it. So these problems are everywhere, and it seems like it's really coming to a head. And, you know, on harvesteating.com, I sell different food products, spices. I also have a line of vegan Parmesan cheeses. They're called Thoughtful Harvest. And I have to buy foods in the commodity market to get the ingredients to manufacture these products. So, you know, my vegan cheese is made with almonds, and you're hearing just about daily almond farmers are just ripping their trees out because the almonds are one of the thirstiest crops that there are. They drink a lot of water. So Central Valley, a lot of California farmers, they're just yanking them out of the ground because they only have so much water, and they have to use it where they feel they're going to get the best bang for their buck. So having to buy and function in these markets, the outages are astounding. Some of my spice products, they rely on, I use as many U.S. grown things as possible, but certainly some of it comes from India. And the supplies are just not there. And it's the same thing with packaging. I need packaging to use and sell these products, but it's so sporadic, David. In 2020, I couldn't get any packaging at all, none, because it's plastic packaging, and they were using it for hand sanitizer bottles and plexiglass that were all covered up in these days. So you couldn't get any packaging. I started to get some a little bit this year, made an initial purchase. We've manufactured these vegan cheeses. They're over at harvesteating.com, and they'll soon be out on Amazon. But now I'm hearing from the packaging supplier, they're telling me, yeah, we can get you more lids maybe in September or October. That doesn't work for somebody in the business. And I know a lot of other food manufacturers, and they're having real problems getting things that you would think are basic. And then, of course, the supply of meat is being really, really curtailed. Having connections to the restaurant industry, like I mentioned earlier. I had a conversation with a chef that I hired, and I think he said it was a $10 a pound one day to the next increase in filet mignon prices. A few years ago, the amount of seed potatoes in the Russian River Valley, not there. A lot of cold, so there's difficulties in potatoes. And we used to get really great Idaho potatoes, and we'd make hand-cut French fries at these restaurants that I was running. And these potatoes got smaller and smaller and smaller. And I would read the market reports coming from the food service companies, and the amount of outages and shortages and price increases. And we no longer get this potato, so now we're going to substitute this potato. And these things were beat up, a lot of black marks on them, 2 inches long. Just the quality of the produce and the availability, lettuce shortages. This was happening all through 2020, and I know in 2021. So I think people really need to, number one, wake up about this and start stocking up their house with as much food as possible, and then doing what you're doing. I mean, I put out a podcast the other day on my podcast, a Harvest Eating podcast, urging people to plant perennial bushes, to start gardening, to go and meet a farmer, to find local meat. All these things are available to do, and you really need to kind of wake up and do it before you're in a food line, like you said. I mean, because that can never happen in the United States, of course. But I'm alarmed, and I know I'm in the food industry. I have been for 30 years, and I see what's going on. I know a lot of farmers, and it's a serious situation.
Yeah, and just from I guess a lot of people would be asking the same question. Why would the farmers with the almond plantations decide to rip up their trees instead of just not giving them water let them possibly go dormant, maybe survive, because one little taproot will survive without water. You know, they pretty much will try to go into their survival mode. Why would the farmers rip the trees up when they know there's a possibility, if rains do come or if there is some moisture coming in the next few months, just a typhoon or a hurricane comes off the Pacific and moisturizes the area again, those trees could sort of revitalize themselves just enough to stay alive to the next season. I mean, what do they see out in the future that they're tearing up their trees now, that they're almost saying we're out of business, there'll never be any more water again, we're never going to grow anything again? For me, that makes no sense why farmers would rip up their trees.
Yeah, it's scary. And when you look at an almond tree, for instance, you can't plant it and harvest it in a year or 2 years. I mean, these are 5-6 years to start getting anything. And they have, a good productive life for 15 or 20 years. So they're seeing something we're not with what's going on with water. I know some farmers did go and mechanically shake off the young almonds to help the tree so it doesn't have that stress of producing almonds, and just maybe like you said, it stays in the ground alive barely until the next rains come. So that's happened as well. But a lot of them, 400 acres of trees at a time are being ripped out in some areas. And, when you, as a smaller producer like me, I don't buy railroad cars full of almonds. And what happens, you start seeing these bigger producers, they won't sell to the little guy anymore. So if you're not a major customer, you're just pushed to the wayside. I contacted my supplier today, and I'm waiting to hear back, how much supply is there in the market, because I've got to plan to, remanufacture the products. But it's really becoming, at least for me, something that I enjoy doing it. They're great products. The customers love them. I've been selling spices since 2011. I've got thousands of repeat customers, but number one, I'm not going to substitute ingredients because I'm not trying to make $1 billion. So I'm not going to use cheap ingredients just to sell it to somebody. So, somebody emailed me today and they said they like a spice blend. It's called Carolina Competition Barbecue, but some of the ingredients that I use, I just can't get because I use contract grown ingredients. And that's when you make a contract with a farmer and you get a harvest. I don't buy them on the open market. And when you start using ingredient brokers, they don't even know where the food comes from. It's just, we've got, 1,000 pounds of garlic powder. They can't tell you where it comes from because a lot of it come from China, here and there, all over the place. So I don't do that. And for me, it's losing its luster. I just don't enjoy having to scramble around and substitute to make foods because I really care about what I'm doing. Yeah, it all comes down to the supply, and people think it's endless. They just think that it will never run out. And but if you look back through history, time will tell, and you can see where there's been products. My father-in-law, he's from England, and he was telling me he's 78 years old. He remembers rationing cards. You would go into the stores, and he grew up in Windsor, right near the castle, and you'd have a ration card. And the storekeeper, his grandfather was a storekeeper, and they would, mark your card to show how many eggs you got that day or how much milk, whatever it was. So these are things that, there is historical precedent for it. Just we don't think in the breadbasket of the world here in the United States that it can ever be an issue.
So what are some of the easiest crops to grow, do you think? Like, let's say I'm a beginning gardener, Keith, and I'm listening in there and say, well, I'm super excited. I want to go to the store today and buy seeds. One thing, we went to a co-op store this morning, and what used to be a super giant seed rack of, probably 200 different varieties is squeezed down into, you talked about some beets and a few other things, but there's not many seeds left even on the seed racks now as you're going through, because we're coming into the midsummer. It's kind of at the end of planting season, unless you're going to put pumpkins in the ground. But if I'm really excited right now, give me some ideas of what do you think some of the easiest crops are to get started with for just a person who says, I never grew a thing before. Here's my first seed. Now what do I do?
I think every beginning gardener has faced that question and had to make those decisions. And I would first recommend securing seeds, number one, going to a place. And you want to also quickly go over, or I'll go over the difference between open pollinated and hybrid seeds. Now, a hybrid seed that you can buy, you go to Lowe's or Home Depot, they've got all these hybrid seeds there. They do have heirlooms too, but a hybrid seed only grows one time. So you cannot save the seeds from a hybrid plant and get the same exact fruit or vegetable from it, because it won't grow what they call true to type. So for an example, Sweet 100 cherry tomatoes is a great product. It's not genetically modified, it's just a hybrid. So it's been bred to produce a lot of beautiful cherry tomatoes, but you cannot save the seeds. So the smart thing to do is to find the heirloom open pollinated varieties of seeds. So a place like Baker Creek, it's rareseeds.com. That'll be a good thing to put in your show notes. So first of all, get yourself some heirloom seeds that you can save the seed from. But once you start getting some seeds, the first thing I would suggest are perennial trees and bushes. Those take quite a few years. I mean, not a tremendous amount. You can get blueberries in a year or two, but I would buy trees and bushes and get those planted first. Things like asparagus that are perennial that come back. And then I would look on the internet and find books about companion planting. And I would plant a polyculture around these crops. But then, some of the best things that we can grow that are easy, potatoes are very easy. I've grown hundreds of linear feet of potatoes and had so many potatoes we didn't know what to do with them, and we were giving them away and storing them. So potatoes can produce a bumper crop. And then you start talking about winter squashes, where you can, in the Carolinas, sweet potatoes grow tremendously well. And you can eat the greens from sweet potatoes. The potatoes store a long time. They're pretty caloric and dense. All the winter squashes are tremendous to grow, because those, you're in July, this is the perfect time, at least in your area, to start putting butternut squash and acorn squash, things like that, into the ground. Because if you get 20 or 30 butternut squashes or acorn squashes, you can be eating off those things for months and months. So if you're really interested in this kind of thing, hopefully you have a cool basement that doesn't get a lot of light, because you can store these foods. You can also learn about creating a root cellar, which is an excellent thing to do. Basically, all the old time things that we used to do, that our parents used to do and grandparents, fermenting, tremendously important. So therefore, things like cabbage, and you can ferment anything, cabbage, tomatoes, carrots, it all ferments well. But if you plant cabbage, those are pretty easy to grow. You're going to want to likely put a cabbage net over them to keep out cabbage worms. But also, again, companion planting. What things can you plant with the cabbage that the bugs like or don't like? And what kind of flowers can you plant in between there to attract ladybugs and other beneficial, because there's a lot of beneficials out there, and that's where you really need to do your study. But something like cabbages, whether you grow them yourselves or you go to a farmer's market and buy 15 or 20 pounds and make sauerkraut. Our refrigerator is filled with sauerkraut. I make it probably 25 pounds at a time. I've got an old German crock, and it's salt and cabbage. That's it. And in 6 weeks, you've got really usable food, and you've turned, cabbage is a healthy thing, but when you ferment it, it makes it a lot more healthy, and it also preserves it. I also ferment all my hot peppers, and I make a hot pepper paste, and it lasts for years. So these are things, strategies that people can use. So number one, you need to get a source of seeds. Then I would start planting perennial trees and bushes. Then I would plant crops that you like that have further value down the line. Like I just mentioned with fermenting. What about tomatoes, where you can make tomato sauce and can that? Squashes that can be harvested and will store well. Then another thing, you talk about making an investment in yourself. Rather than buying the new shiny bass boat, what about buying a food dehydrator or an all-American pressure canner or a food dehydrator? These are things, or glass jars. I know you've recently talked about canning jars. You cannot wait until you need them, because when you need them, they're not going to be there. You need to invest in them now, because they're not going to go bad. Canning jars and lids are a great thing. When I was filming my TV show, one of our title sponsors was a company that made reusable canning lids. So investing in these kind of ancillary supplies to help take the harvest that you get from your own land, from your neighbors, from farmers markets, from CSAs, and you can turn these things into other foods down the road. But it's about education after all. There's a book out there. It's called Jam It, Pickle It, Cure It. And it's basically a book filled with home economics projects that surround food, whether it's making your own ketchup or easy cheeses. I mean, if you have a source of raw dairy in your state there, you can buy raw dairy. And I'll provide a link to that as well. There's an online site that shows you exactly what's going on with raw dairy in all 50 states. There's a lot more states than you would imagine where you could go directly to the farmer, not the supermarket, and buy higher quality, well created foods like raw milk. And you have to do your homework when you're dealing with raw milk. You can't be buying it from somebody that doesn't care for the pastures, doesn't know how to handle the milk. I mean, those are important questions to ask. Are they doing testing? But those are foods. Earlier, you talked about nutritional content. You're going to get a lot more nutritional benefit from raw milk or homemade yogurt than pasteurized milk. So this is a pretty, it's an organic thing from the ground up, and you need to look at all your foods and start making a list. Seeds, bushes, equipment, canning supplies, connections, all these things, gardening tools.
Yeah, that was a good, thinking about root cellars. How about a Faraday root cellar? Because a lot of people are talking about Faraday cages, but at the same time, storing things. So do you think it's a possibility to do a quote unquote Faraday root cellar, trying to combine different systems together and, looking at what you can grow in terms of the flowers in your garden that are also medicines that could be turned into medicines, instead of just being a flower that either attracts or repels different types of predatory wasps that, lay their eggs inside those caterpillars. And if you think you see a pretty white butterfly, for me, that's terrifying because I know they're laying eggs to go eat up all my vegetables. So, thinking about flowers that you could plant at the same time that then could be dried and turned into different types of medicinals, whether it be an aqueous ultrasonic separation, and then you could store that in alcohol, or that's why I have some of the beeswax out there. I'm just starting and learning in my very first year of trying to use beeswax to combine for salves and balms, lip, these kind of things. So I'm getting into it more on the medicinal side of things too, of growing for medicine. But the food is your own medicine, but also it could be in terms of antibiotics, the most famous being marigolds. Boil that down into a slow boiled tincture, and then it's an antibiotic drop there. I mean, there's some really simple basics, but again, the marigolds are great for getting pests out of your garden. So at the end of the year, there's a lot of benefits to be able to harvest different flowers, etc.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And that's something I've studied. I'm not an expert in it, but I talked earlier about planting trees and bushes. I know a lot of people that grow elderberries, which can be made into a syrup. It's an immune booster, really popular right now. I know when elderberry syrup was flying off the shelves in record numbers, it was actually hard to get for a little bit. But you can grow elderberries, and there's a lot of different varieties, and they're very easy to grow. It's, again, a perennial, and you get a great harvest from them, and you can make medicine with them. But yeah, I definitely believe food is medicine, and not putting chemicals into your body to start with is really important. Everybody wants their immune system up. You look at some of these things in the store, and there'll be 60, 70 ingredients listed on the label. You have to eat whole foods and really avoid the center of the supermarket. That way you don't need all these medicines. But yeah, it's a good point you make. There are a lot of things in nature and a lot of people that are really smart about crafting wild edibles and turning them into all different types of tinctures and creams. There's just myriad of examples of that stuff. I need to learn about that a little more myself.
It's a never-ending journey. I mean, you could learn as much as you could, and then you come back to, you might say, the woman who is sprinkling 7 all over the plants, but the amount of knowledge she has as a gardener for how many years she'd been doing for 50 years, and she can still learn as well. And you can never know too much. You could be alive for 500 years and still be learning about how to do something better as you move through this whole hands in the soil holistic way to get the highest yield and companion plants, save, store, all these things. It really will be a never-ending journey if you decide to step on that first step on for the rest of your life to surround yourself with food and make that part of your life, your lifestyle. It can't be just like, hey, I'm going to do it. It's got to be incorporated in your lifestyle. Some people play music, but it's got to be part of the lifestyle where you go in your garage and it's full of tools because they're, some of them still have mud on them because we're, out there planting the last couple of days. It's that, continuous incorporation of that skill set into your life.